My name is Mia Yu, and I'm one of Lyn Hejinian's students at Berkeley, but I'm also living in Cambridge at the moment. So I'm an avid attender of the Woodberry Poetry Room's events, and it's my honor to be able to introduce Lyn Hejinian for one of them. To introduce Lyn Hejinian is both a pleasure and an impossibility, but I think the conviction that a sense of pleasure and a sense of impossibility are often exquisitely intertwined is what makes me, at least, firmly one of Lyn Hejinian's students. So let me begin with impossibilities. First, the poet Lyn Hejinian needs no introduction. You are all here because you probably want to see in person the author of Writing as an Aid to Memory, or Happily, or The Book of a Thousand Eyes, or the landmark My Life and My Life in the 90s. You probably also know Lyn Hejinian as the co-author of Sight with Leslie Scalapino, of Saga Circus with Jack Collum, and of The Wide Road with Carla Harriman. You might also know that Lyn's work has been the subject of critical essays by scholars and fellow poets ranging from Marjorie Perloff to Claudia Rankine to Miriam Nichols. I shouldn't even try to add my own 2 cents here. But here's the next impossibility. It would be impossible to introduce Lyn Hejinian for the inauguration of the Woodberry Poetry Room's Reinventing the Workshop series without divulging something I probably shouldn't. So forgive me, Lyn, but here goes. I have become convinced that, as much as we might regard Lyn as one of the great writers of the last half-century, Lyn is less a great writer than she is an almost inhuman reader. This is a fact. I don't know anyone who reads as widely, as carefully, as intensely, as generously, as productively, and as joyfully as Lyn Hejinian. You might already know this through encountering her critical philosophical essays in the language of inquiry. But in addition to these studies, Lyn is the co-editor of Poetics Journal with Barrett Watton and worked tirelessly over the last years to compile 2013's A Guide to Poetics Journal and to produce its comprehensive digital archive. Lyn is also a founder and editor of Tumba Press and Atelos Press. She is a curator of the Holloway series of poetry at UC Berkeley, and she is a professor of English at UC Berkeley, teaching courses in both poetic practice and scholarship. It is through my extraordinary luck in having taken one of Lyn Hejinian's poetry writing workshops that I can confirm she gives the same attention and confidence to her students' writings as she might give to Gertrude Stein's. She takes your devotion to poetry seriously. She takes your poetic project seriously. For Lyn, the rejection of closure and the conviction that poetic language, writing's pleasure and impossibility, resides in it being a mode of inquiry also extends to the role of the workshop. A workshop with Lyn Hejinian is not a singular block of time each week in which a group of people put on their poet masks and carefully circle around a spontaneous overflow creative genius condensed into an artifact we call the poem. Lyn's workshops are restless and nomadic, wandering out of their fixed classrooms and set times, to take over evenings in an otherwise empty Berkeley building, or to convene around Lyn's own dining room table with poets wedged between her tagine and her art books, or to spill into pints of beer at a student pub. During my first semester at Berkeley, I naively pushed my way into Lyn's graduate poetry workshop and found myself spending 2 days a week discussing the manuscripts of a brilliant young group of poets, several of which have been published as books now, such as those by Hilary Gravendike and Julian Berlasky, and then attending an additional evening each week with them, Lyn, and Lisa Robertson, who was a visiting lecturer at the time, to discuss a syllabus we composed ourselves and to engage in various collaborative writing projects. One of those writing experiments was a manifesto on literary scholarship that Lyn, with great glee, photocopied and distributed to all the English faculty's mailboxes. And how can I even begin describing the daily emails that flew between us all, with lines, snippets of lines that grew upon each other and unexpectedly emerged as both poetry and friendship? Again, it's impossible not to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm left feeling like I haven't done Lyn's teaching justice. I wasn't there during the years filled with protests at Berkeley when Lyn prominently and tirelessly fought the budget cuts and advocated for students' rights, ranging from tuition affordability to adequate health care to protection from police brutality. I wasn't there because I was in another country and then here, having babies and being far too drawn into myself. But after she spent all day carrying picket signs, rallying through the streets of Berkeley and Oakland, and composing protest poetry with her undergraduates, Lyn would still find time to write to me, often just before she was off making dinner, to offer an account of what she had seen that day, to address my personal concerns with patience and perspective, and to remind me that just because the outside world felt a little lost to me then, it didn't mean I was lost to the world, and that there would always be at least one hand to pull me back into whatever it is within poetry and the world we call the workshop. Lyn Hejinian.
I look forward to the time when I can introduce Mia to a group of people that have come to hear her work and her ideas. She's an extraordinary friend and scholar, and will soon be finishing her dissertation and ascending to the heights of intellectual life. I wanted to start. I have a mixed agenda here, and I want to start in a relaxed way, which I will do in a second, or maybe I'm already doing, and then just make some remarks that some of which are obvious about what workshop might be, and then Mia has put together some examples of works that I have done with other people, or that other people have done, and that might help be examples of kinds of things that shift the typical thinking of who it is that's being served in workshops, like who workshops are for. And maybe I'll enter into the question of who workshops are for by telling you about the opening session of a non-workshop course that I'm co-teaching with a medievalist at UC Berkeley right now, which is on the theory of the poet. The medievalist is named Emily V. Thornbury, and she just got tenure this last fall in the Berkeley English department. And her area of expertise and scholarship is in poetry before 1066. And her first academic book just came out, and it's called, I think it's called The Figure of the Poet in Anglo-Saxon England. And I had read a couple of chapters of this, and during her mid-career review period, which is part of the process that many of you know, and on your way to the big tenure question. And I was just completely captivated by her analysis of who the culture thought the poet was in around 900. And so I proposed that we co-teach this course. She agreed. We're now doing it. We have 25 undergraduates in it. And in the first session, after the usual preliminaries, we said, well, let's just brainstorm what is the poet. And so chalk in hand, we went to the blackboard, and the first thing that came out was tormented genius. So we wrote that down, and then among the things that came out were Yeats, Coleridge. Then they went on a thing with just naming poets that were emblematic, the emblematic capital P poet. Someone then said outsider, then someone said, yeah, outsider and drunk. So there was a little play around the inebriate poet or the mad poet around that. And someone said someone who dresses in black leather and plays the bongo drums. So there was sort of a gesture towards maybe the beat image. And then a woman student said, if it's a woman, angry. So there was some conversation about angry women, and I pointed out that some, especially African-American poetry, Amiri Baraka had died just before that, and I mentioned him as someone who was emblematically angry. So that was some conversation about why the poet might be angry. And then we ended up, before the class ended, with sensitive and solitary. So you can see that students currently are imagining something that is very closely aligned with romantic poetry and the kind of Wordsworthian model of poetry, which was really convenient because the first two texts that we taught in the class combined, so the students were reading them and talking about them in tandem, are a Egil's saga, which is an Old Norse saga, written probably in the 1200s, early 1200s. And Egil is the name of the poet, and he's a brute. By the time he's 7, he's murdered 5 of his playmates. He's already a drunk, so that fits with their image. And he's an incredible poet. He goes in front of the king and recites these perfect poems. And then there's Wordsworth. Anyway, it was very convenient. Okay, so I want to talk about this figure of the poet initially, because that's what people who go to a workshop want to be, is they want to be the author. And I want to suggest that this is actually not something to be accepted as a natural given, that the image of the author is very much an image, and people come who have artistic ambitions or aspirations, and they want to be the artist, in this case, the author or the poet. And so one of the first things that seems good to challenge is the notion of what it is that they are asking to be. And of course, many of them, certainly at Berkeley, most of them are young, and being tormented genius is extremely appealing. I even had one student who signed all of his unbelievably bad poetry, sentimental love poetry from a very, very machismo position, but he signed all of his poems Latin lover boy. And when it was suggested that they were had problematic aspects, he would say, they're from my heart. So he was the poet. He actually had achieved this entirely. So I made up this title, Authorship, Allegories of the Wall, and I wanted to propose that the notion of the author that students or workshop participants bring with them as a kind of wall. And it's a very interesting one, and one that no workshop can and nor probably should simply tear down. That there's something important about agency and responsibility and actually being the author of the work that one makes. I don't want to denigrate that, nor even particularly, despite Latin lover boy, make fun of it. But it is a not uncomplicated figure. And the wall in question, or the wallness in question, I want to suggest is not simply or even easily the wall that the workshop participant makes of him or herself in proposing him or herself as the author, the person who's going to translate from profound experience or interesting observation or whatever other concatenation of inspiration and hard work goes through him or her to produce something on the other end. But in fact, there's like there's a number of factors that go into the composition of my allegorical wall, which includes all kinds of expectations about what the role of aesthetic production is in the given culture, what it will lead to in terms of not like recognition is boring, but what kind of efficacy and meaning it can have, particularly in a culture like ours, in its sort of present capitalist crisis or series of self-generating crises in which questions of innovation, novelty, new style, new manner is incredibly vexed, because that's exactly what capitalism has learned to do, is to make newness, novelty, endless creativity. There's all kinds of workshops in business world on creativity, and they mean exactly what we think we mean when we speak about creativity, that it's going to get something out there that everyone's going to want to pay attention to. And for capitalism, of course, either to invest in or to purchase. Happily, poets and most artists are free from that problem, because no one wants what they make, even when they like that it's new and exciting. Okay, so there's the other sort of elements of the wall, apart from expectations and the kinds of social constructions that have gone into developing the image of what the author, the artist, the poet might mean, are things like what exactly is going on in that translation from what I'm calling profound experience, astute observation, etc., into the making of the work. What is what's the nature of this impasse, barrier, conduit, etc., that I'm calling the wall, which may be highly porous. I don't mean it to make it sound like a steel impregnable thing, although it can be like that. But like obvious things like the difference between the signifier and the signified, or in this case, the signified, which is the observation and the profound experience, and then the signifiers, which is the language, which is probably the wall, and then what's on the other side, which may or may not be of interest, etc. And the questions of it's like the border, like a border as in between two nations, between the private and the public, and what kind of transit is going on, if any, between the sensitive, solitary, drunk, mad, tormented genius model and the social world without which the products of this genius have no meaning at all. It's the social world that makes the meaning of artistic work. Otherwise, it's just there as a kind of brute fact. There's a painting, but it's the social world that makes some meaning out of it, and so that's another aspect of the wall. Why allegories? Of my title, my interest in allegory, or what I've been tending to call allegorical function, comes out of teaching Walter Benjamin's Arcades project, and then reading his The Origins of German Tragic Drama, which I taught the Arcades project in a graduate seminar. Benjamin talks a great deal about allegory, or he uses the term allegory a lot. He points to many things, like the debris of culture, as being allegorical, but nowhere gives a handy and easily comprehensible definition or explanation of what he means. And in The Origins of German Tragic Drama, which is really a book about allegory, he still doesn't do that. So that you end up reading it and still feeling somewhat mystified, although deeply attracted to this notion of allegory. I've used the idea of an allegorical function in a non-aesthetic context, which is the context of protest or of demonstration actions, and made the claim, which may be suspect, but it's useful, made the claim that when a group of people do something in a space in which usually other things are happening, that they are, in essence, it's as if they recaptioned the space. So that, like the Radcliffe gym, if it was suddenly the scene of an occupation by non-documented workers on the staff of Harvard, it would not be the Radcliffe gym nor the Woodberry Poetry Room's annex, but that it would be yet another site, however temporary. And it seemed to me useful to think of that as an allegorical action, like a recaptioning of the space for even a brief amount of time. And I derived this partly from Frederick Jameson's, and this does have to do with the workshop, by the way, sort of. Frederick Jameson's, he has an essay in which he talks about cognitive mapping, the kinds of ways in which people, especially in gallery installation art, where you have to figure out what's going on, but it's got much wider ramifications. But the cognitive mapping requires that you allegorize what you're seeing, that you rename it. It could, this is about X. This is about the problems of loneliness in bedrooms or whatever. And it's a kind of captioning function that Jameson thinks of as allegorical, and I think, and I do too. All right, so I just didn't want to like throw up this allegories of the wall and not explain what I meant by allegories. It would seem like intellectually irresponsible. So that's what I was thinking of, and okay. So for the purposes of this workshop or my lecture demonstration or whatever it is, the question comes up, obviously, why reinvent the workshop? And I think Christina Davis, in her opening remarks at 5 o'clock, said it exactly right, that it's not, that the point is not to throw out, nor to make snide, glib comments about the workshop as a format. There are, as it happens, and thanks partly to the fact that so many incredibly imaginative, inventive, and talented people are running writing workshops in so many different kinds of venues, not just in universities and colleges, but in hospices, in prisons, in juvie halls, etc. There are all kinds of new ways being utilized to get people to enjoy the sheer pleasure of making things. And that might be that that's kind of where a wall can fall, that it's not that you have to inflate yourself into the capital A artist or capital P poet, but just the pleasure of doing it, which is the pleasure of generating aesthetic event. So that, and by which I mean experiential event, like using aesthetics in its earlier sense of an experience, and one that has intensity and meaningfulness, and the products of which are maybe not as important. And in the production of this kind of aesthetic pleasure, or in the engagement with it, it seems to me that one of the things that is overcome is the kind of lyric ego or subjective self-importance that comes out of the tradition that misreads Wordsworth, who actually, the Romantics, as in my reading of them, were not extolling or exhorting people, extolling individualism or exhorting people to be more sensitive, but rather to look at the world and see that the world still had wonder in it, even in the era of industrialization and kinds of science that in that period that some of the great Romantic poets thought was murdering life, that science was eviscerating rather than discovering wonder. Okay, I lost the line of that thought. Well, anyway, so it's not about the ego and power. It is about agency, but responsible agency, and the kind of social engagement that a real aesthetic event can generate, in my experience of it, both as a maker and as an enjoyer, and in doing collaborations. Okay, so that means that the author gets, the author function gets shifted out of primacy, and that the actual work of making becomes more important. So whatever it is that that is centered in the centrality of the subjectivity of the maker gets diminished in favor of something that's actually more pleasurable and certainly causes less anxiety, which is the making of the work. Okay, then I have lots of stuff scribbled here, which I think I've said enough about because you all can probably know it. Anyway, okay, so I'm ready for the slides. Oh, slide person. So I think that one of the ways that a workshop, since it presupposes that people are doing something rather than just listening to something. And there seems to be two dominant ways in which to refocus aspiration and interest, and from the making point of view. One is, and now we're just going to talk about poetry, one is to set up conditions in which what we can call the medium dictates it takes charge of what's going to happen. And the other is and so that your intentions become secondary to what the language is suggesting. And then the other is working collaboratively. So I wanted to start with, now my glasses so I can make sure we're talking about the same thing. This is the poet Jackson McClough made this. I'm going to use the term game for these inventions. One could think of other terms, and I don't want to trivialize it at all, but it seems that's what I've always called them, so I'll just stick with my vocabulary. These are protocols for composition that Jackson McClough invented, and there are various ways to use to select. But the first rule is that you make a list of 26 sentences or lines or phrases that seem to come out of and in some way epitomize daily life. And then, in no particular order, you assign them either a number or a letter of the alphabet or a playing card. And then you choose some method of selecting, like, how many lines you want to have. Like, say I wanted to do a poem on the everyday life of Lyn Hejinian. So my first line would be the L line. Did somebody knock on the door? What's the matter with the baby? Is the baby crying? Stanza break. Is there anything you need downstairs? Let's have eggs for breakfast. Shall I turn the light on? I'll see you. Is the baby crying? I'll see you. I'm going to the store. Is the baby crying? I think I made a mistake there somewhere. Anyway, but you end up with this little, rather witty, rather charming poem that's entirely out of your control once you've chosen these everyday life lines. Or you could use playing cards, etc. It's sort of self-explanatory. Okay, next one. This is from this page and the next one, but let's keep on this one for a minute, are from two works by the poet Clark Coolidge. I don't know how he selected, but both of these are generated by the dictionary. And I don't know if he just did like necromancy, like bibliomancy, like just to open the thing and point to the line. But this one is mostly at the level of like nouns and phrases. Red bill, also any of the several serrate jars. The only place force genius, 'cause of roll, start from hat, state. So selecting phrases out of the dictionary definitions of things. And then the next one. And this one from Polaroid. These are both book-length works. They're both about 100 pages, maybe a little more long. This one, again, is from the dictionary, but the constraints are he's allowing himself much larger sections. And I've never heard him read from the maintains, but I've heard him read from Polaroid, and it's very dial around forth enough means that there, since it's still less closely light, dial and around time says yet lots, dial by scene apart, then by kit says forth as there, that the sleeve. That's inadequate. He's a jazz drummer, so it's much more animated, and when he reads, he like does this stuff that's very musical and percussive drummer like. Anyway, again, all this stuff is not like that he sat around thinking, what am I going to say? But just generated out of supply texts. Okay, next. And this one is by Caroline Bergvall. And the method from this one is she was working in London and went to the British Library. And, well, let me read out her statement, which I typed out. Ever since the Reverend Carey's translation of 1805, translating Dante into English has become something of a cultural industry. Some 200 translations in less than 200 years. Faced with this seemingly unstoppable activity, I decided to collate the opening lines of the Inferno translations as archived by the British Library up to May 2000, exactly 700 years after the date fixed by Dante for the start of the comedy's journey. By the time I closed the project, that is in May 2000, 2 new translations had reached the shelves. So it's 200 years of the opening 3 lines of Dante's Divine Comedy, the first book. And it's many, many pages long. And I've heard her read from this work, and there is this incantatory quality to it, obviously, because it's the same 3 lines that are being reproduced over and over. But you can hear these kind of cultural shifts that happen in terms of the order of the phrasing, and then this endless darkness that I am halfway done and I'm lost. I'm only partway there, but I don't know where I am. Over and over, it's like this, and it becomes this incredibly melodic incantation into, or in my reading of it, of this enormous impasse, which is being halfway there and lost. Anyway, it's published. It's called Via. I think it's extraordinary. Okay, and then the next page, and this is from a work by a person who has invented the area of conceptual poetry. And made a great deal out of the invention of conceptual poetry. And this is the work of his that I think is what? Yeah, we can reinvent it. I mean, it's already existed, but this is from about the 5th, 6th page into a book called The Weather. For exactly 1 year, Kenneth Goldsmith taped every weather report on a particular New York City news station. So they happened about every 15 minutes, thereabouts. I just cut and paste this off of what I could find on the internet because I didn't want to go through the labor of retyping a page of Goldsmith, of this work. But at a little later in the work, they start reporting the weather in Baghdad in the same paragraphs as the weather in New York City because Desert Storm is underway. So it will say it's 25 degrees in Central Park now, big snowstorm coming, and it looks like a dust storm in Baghdad, 105 degrees, hope you have your water, boys. Like, it's really weird. And so, bring your snowshoes today, folks. Could get stuck on the internet. And so this sort of playing off that these weather people would do with the military in Iraq. Anyway, there's nothing original in this, let's say. That's what Goldsmith has an essay called Uncreative Poetry, or uncreative writing, whatever it's called. Anyway, he doesn't believe in creativity, which could be read as a kind of anti-capitalist position now that I think of it. But anyway, he's done a lot of works like this, using different sources, and then this endless sort of labor of reproduction that seems really odd and obsessive and interesting. Okay, then I just want to pause there. I don't have PowerPoint slides of this. Another way in which to move, like to change what the wall is in my allegorical figure, is kinds of works of translation in which the workshop participant is asked to engage with a text in some kind of novel ways that again pushes the workshop participant out of the trap of having to express his or herself and instead go with some other grounds of material. And one of them is one that many of you will be familiar with, is a constraint invented by a group of writers based it began in France in the late 1930s, continued to this day, called Oulipo, and they have various kinds of composition rules, but one of them is a translation rule in which a person takes a pre-existing text of his or her own or someone else and replaces, can decide every noun or every adverb, adjective, whatever, by using a dictionary and picking the seventh one down. So that if you had the hen jumps, and then you just hen noun, and you go from hen, and you count 7 nouns down, and you replace hen with that one, and then if you want to do verbs, go to J, jumps, etc. There's an incredibly transgressive Oulipian translation of Maya Angelou's poem that she read on the first inauguration of Bill Clinton, with an Oulipian transformation of that was done by Clark Coolidge and a guy named Larry Fagan, and then published in a little edition that was an exact replica of the published chapbook of Maya Angelou's poem, and it's savagely funny. And these are 2 white men doing an Oulipian transformation of a poem by a black woman. There's many things that are awful about it, and many things that are really fascinating about it too. So that's another example. Okay. Oh yeah, and then another kind of translation, again, one that's familiar to many of you, the homophonic one, where you translate from a different language and you sound out the sounds of that language, and then you try to find English language words that have a similar sound. And one example that is the San Francisco-based poet David Melnick translated the first book of the Iliad from the Greek into English homophonically and turned it into a ecstatic gay poem. I don't read Greek, and anyway, I don't have the original. I was gonna, yeah. You haven't memorized the first 2 lines of the Iliad, do you? In Greek? Yeah, all right. Well, David Melnick's translation of just the first 2 lines is, men in Aida, they appeal, eh? A day, oh Achilles, allow men in energy Achaeans, all gay ethic, eh? So I don't read ancient Greek nor modern Greek, but people tell me that this is, if you've read, it's good?
It's very, very good. Actually,
Yeah. So, okay. All right. So then another translation. This is from Harriet Mullen's book called Sleeping with a Dictionary. And Dim Lady, my honey bunches peepers are nothing like neon. Today's special that Red Lobster is redder than her kisser. Harriet Mullen is an African-American writer, teaches at UCLA. And this is a translation of one of the Dark Lady sonnets from Shakespeare. So she's playing on the Dark Lady, Dim Lady, Shakespeare's odd odd praise of this dark lady in the poem. My honey bunch's peepers are nothing like the neon. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Today's special at Red Lobster is redder than her kisser. Carl is more red than her lips red, etc. Okay. And then I want to go to some collaborations, including one that Mia, or at least one that Mia. So next slide. So this is one of a series of poems that were generated in a workshop in which poets had to respond. Everybody started with a line, and this one is from a line of Jack Spicer's. And my thinking was that everybody would spend way too much time having to start a poem if I didn't give them the line to start with. Once they had the line, then they were like, phew. And then they just were to keep writing. But everybody had cue cards available in front of them, and anybody could read out a command, a cue card, at any given time, and everyone in the room had to obey the instruction. So there were things like, let's see, rhyme, repeat a line, tell a lie, allude to another poem, insert your name, mention a hero, use the word blue. And we would generate these cue cards beforehand on index cards, and they just shuffle them and push them around. There was one class where a woman freaked out, like that she was getting short-circuited, and it just was, and she started crying, like, I can't do this, I just want to write my poem. But she got with the program after a while, and she's published a book, and she's really good. Okay, next one. Okay, this is, again, the same kind of rules, and I just wanted to point out, this is from a line by Clark Coolidge, which is, this notebook is too heavy and not even half. And then just look at, and not even half of the pages admit impediments. That must have been, quote something from a famous poem. And so it goes. I found these, I made copies of all of them and made a little book at the end of the semester of all the collaborations. And when I sent them by email to Mia and looked at mine, I have no memory of writing it. It's not very much like what I usually write. And at the time I thought, well, these are just parlor games. They're really fun. It's really good for getting students out of their preconceptions of what they're supposed to be doing, but the results aren't really good. But actually, I think all of the poems in this group, can you show the next one? Because Mia's got one there too, and she doesn't remember writing that. But you can see, like, the admit impediments was from Shakespeare. April being the cruelest month, Mia picked up on the wasteland. And I don't know, Julian Brulaski, ripe for pining my wines. Oh, to like a patient etherized, so she was getting proof rock there. Is there another page of that? Or is that it? Okay, next. Okay, so this is a collaboration that I did with Jack Collum. It's about 25 pages long, so you just see part of it. It's using the same kind of technique, but in this one, it starts with a line, ivory windows to a black room that may be more cloud with pale paints, which I think was a Jack Collum line. And then after that, he gave me a command. So he wrote that line, and then for my line, I had to state your address. Well, that's his address. So maybe I wrote the first line, and then he obeyed the command with his line, and then wrote a command. So all of this is done by mail, like real mail. So there's It unfolds over a long time. But anyway, there it is. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, but there it is. Okay, next one. Okay, this is more interesting. In this game, the poet A writes 2 lines. So I ask you again the same thing. Why do you say, "Comfort me with apples"? And then poet B inserts a line between line 1 and 2, very transgressive, like you're really disordering the person's poem, and then writes a couplet. So, and you agree beforehand how many couplets to go, and then you end with a couplet that's undisturbed at the end. Okay, next one. And this was another, maybe even more transgressive psychologically, although not necessarily artistically, which was a series of dreams that Bob Perlman and I worked on together. He claims that his were not real dreams. Mine were actually a record of real dreams. But the rule was that we would send each other a account of a dream, and then the other would enter that dream and put more material in the dream. And Bob claims, as I said, that his weren't real dreams in the first place, but mine were. And there's a kind of vulnerability, like I'm aware that when you tell people your dreams, you are telling them all kinds of things that you don't know you're telling them. And then you can be either oblivious to the fact that you've revealed something, or that or you can not know that you've done so. But okay, then next one. Yeah, this one, the rule is that it's a diary. And you put, it's a little bit like, there's a Japanese form called a haibun, which is a prose passage and then a very, very short poem that is or isn't related to the prose passage. Basho's The Far Road to the Deep North there's various versions of that title, but it's a sort of medieval Japanese version of this. So this was that you enter a journal entry that's presumably true, and then the next person, so say I do, okay, yeah, the top one is me, 921. I put that little journal entry. Then Jack Collum, in the little short poem underneath, is to write a poem as if he were there and was encapsulating that experience in short poetic form. And then he writes a diary entry. And then the next one on the right-hand side, okay, position and engine poem. That's me, like, pretending to have the deep poetic experience of his journal day, and et cetera. This was a really hard one, actually, to do. Keep trying to put yourself into other people's mental space. Okay, one more. Keep going. Okay, and then this is from a work that Leslie Scalapino and I worked on for about 4 or 5 years, and then she passed away, and we never revised it and never finished it, and so it's just gone into a file cabinet, which is where it will remain. But I thought I would just bring this out and to show you, and this is kind of like just trading paragraphs back and forth, but the rules were that you had to mention something that you'd heard in it. But what it means to hear something, that's unclear. Music, somebody talking, sounds from the environment, or your own voice yattering at you, etc. Okay, and then the last thing, there's one more, is the next one the Shims one? Yeah, okay, let's wait on it just for that. Then the other, Mia in her introduction mentioned another collaboration that happened, or a collaboration that got developed over a period of time with people in a poetics Workshop, which for those of you who are graduate students or faculty sympathetic to the life and plight of graduate students, it was a group of Berkeley English department students who were really dispirited by academic conferences and the kinds of academic writing or the constraints on professional academic writing. And so we decided to do some collaboratively written critical essays. And so it lasted for what, like a semester, a year, or something. And so one of them was that everybody brought in a short poem. And so a piece of paper, everybody would start. I had a kitchen timer. You had 5 minutes to begin your essay, a literary critical essay on the short poem. When the kitchen timer went bing, you passed the poem and the paper on, and the next person had to continue your essay. And you were allowed to do things, but on second thought or second reading, it seems to me that the third line is not about toads, but in fact is about Chaucer. And go on like that. So that we did like ends of short stories, short poems, and then the last one was everybody wrote on the top of a piece of paper the stereotypical literary critical persona that this essay was written by. So the bored, like pre-retirement male who's sick of teaching, sick of thinking, and just is doing it by rote. The fiery gender theorist who's going to really sock it to you, et cetera. There were various, the naive student. So everybody, again, 5 minutes, and then the paper was passed. So at first you were there, like you were naive. Gosh, I really like this poem. It's so cool the way. And then you pass it to the person who's taken on the aggressive gender theory, and they have to now become the naive undergraduate. So, and those were actually turned out to be really interesting. Just looking at the voices that literary critical writing takes on and carries out, and how it can be malleable or not. Okay, how are we doing for time? We have half an hour, yeah? Where's my boss? There. Yeah, okay. So I brought index cards. There's just one of the great, along with paper clips. Oh, you got some? Oh, that's what are on the chairs. Oh, good. Well, if anybody needs more. So could you do the next slide? So I want to do one of these. And I think maybe the best way to do it, since we're sitting in a circle, is just go around in a circle. So your task to start is on the left-hand side of your card, write one word, and on the right-hand side, write 4 words, and then pass it to your right. And then the next line, right, you can just follow the instructions. It's not that very hard. So altogether, everybody in the next half hour will have created co-created 2 8-line poems that are adjacent to each other or facing each other. And my quandary is what to do with them, because we're not going to have time to read aloud this many poems, but maybe we could just read aloud a few samples and
We'll post them in the poetry room.
what?
We'll put them up in the poetry room too.
Oh, cool. Okay. All the better. Can you turn me off? Thank you. Oh, who'd like to read one? Remember, it's not your fault if it's weird. And it's not to your credit if it's good. Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait for the mic.
Is it on? He says it's good.
Stumble. Then once there was, with translation, another homophobic dawn, running down under cold skies. The sun, the little fist given no rule, no fruit, seizing no sullen art, French spring, no candy with Uncle Andy, alas, will ever be enough.
Another? Okay, Don?
Maybe you'll be the winner. Ditch classes, forever past due. Learn spring's song, pay dearly. Tuna fish, glass blower, tomato. The trash, the unsmile friend. Befriend the far, maybe forever. Flung loose, lean closer in. Moon, apple blossom cloud harvest.
Nice one. I could imagine a book, like we would have to invent the name of the author, and then a book of these, and people would think, oh, very interesting, very good. Pulitzer Prize all the way. Another one?
Apple, glimpse the heart be damned, skin crisp bite, or moonlit nights, the mirror mists, the inhabitants curse.
Yeah.
Dispersing, to tell a rosary, corresponding terms, a silent truth. In scattering, responding means confession. Answer, I will not. Allay. There is a tournament, hickey, tired snails, and argumentative ants. Many rabbits, run, wild run, eat in time, if only, if only.
Anyone else? Dan, thank you.
Dust everywhere sticking, ancient Athenian amnesty. Who forgot what now? Her dogs unleash, spoon the pudding, say you, verily. Brief, lucid, panel, accept. But home is not lucid, over bevel, Quasimodo, do know how to count.
Drainpipe, never again, all that hair. It moved onward then. It moved onward then, it never did. Forward drain dreamed. Photograph, draw pitch black. The willing accomplice, a breath willed. Squelched, sit down and eat more. Count your unlucky stars.
Yeah, Vasiliki?
Forward, boot heel, sea swell travel, stone-lapped wave forms. Kentucky Derby far out, winner takes all, horses coming down. As in the bird, yellow hair cloud, whole bean, coffee, grinds, coffee bean. 3 more days, 3 more at least.
Anyone else? Okay, more over here, there, and then Helen.
Prolific experience shows, or does it? The limit still exists. Can't camp, can't talk. Trouble with limits, but check ego. Over the maddening bay, no lessening sights, I despair. Trust, hut, shelter there, and check again the embrace of ignorance.
I think Helen wanted to, did you volunteer? No, now you, I'm committing you. That's the price of friendship.
Couplets. Relentlessly, coolly, an ornate filigree, in Utrecht one autumn, rang out from the tower of brick, came through muddy. Insert third line, right. Otherwise we run to others, defiantly smack a brack or a stampede, oil painting of twins.
Anyone else? Okay.
Turkmenistan. I have cramp in foot. Kick out the jams. 4 words, please give me to be roses. Tore open the wrapper, no proper training, hired anyway, reserves. Crown, a reason, born again now, a golden spoked circlet.
So why do these work? This is not a question that I have an answer to. It sounds like one of those horribly pedagogical questions. Like, now, why? Tell me why these work. I mean, just listening to them, there's partly some expectation that we're used to these short line lyrics, maybe, so that the sound of them works. And it might be that when you have so little material that you can expend, that concision makes for something that feels like there's a kind of intensification that happens just by virtue of the brevity of the things. I mean, it's like, yeah.
I felt two principles were emerging. One was to vary. I felt two principles were emerging. One was to vary what could be a list of images or objects, and the other one was to prevent any resolution, any effort towards resolution that was detected earlier in order to keep it in flux.
Yeah, and I could imagine like doing this over an extended period of time, not in a single session, but I tried to do something a little bit like, this is where Charlie Altieri completely didn't understand the rules. For 4 months, he didn't understand them. But just in the way of a class, that everybody, like I handed out postcards at the beginning of the semester and numbered them, so that they would like be, I don't know why I numbered them, but anyway I did. Doesn't have the logic, eludes me now. But everybody was supposed to just take one home, like you just pass them out and then take them home, and next class you had to bring them. And Charlie always wrote illegibly and the wrong number of words, no matter what. But it actually didn't matter. Like once I could decipher his handwriting or go to his office and say, what was this? He still had few words, and this kind of intensity happened that seems really interesting to me. And I don't know what would happen if the parameters were really long, like 8 words, 10, 12, 14, and back down. Like that could get, I don't know, I think I'll try it at some point.
It's like there's a different logic between every single line. So the person who wrote the first word and then the next one who writes a line in response to that has some idea in their head about whether or not, about how it relates. And then the third person has a totally different idea. So when you read the poem, it's kind of like 8 different logics that you can't know in between every line. And it's kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, there's another Japanese form, the renga, which is usually 2, 3, or 4 poets would get together and do this, and the trick was to do it really fast. And there's a repetition rule in the form, but basically each contribution is supposed to shift what looks like the trajectory of what you already had, so that I felt I was trying to further the little poem or poems along, but you could also imagine trying to subvert them, like where you just throw the proverbial monkey wrench in the machine, and especially when you're trading with someone. Like sometimes I've done lots and lots of these collaborations with Jack Collum, partly because he won't stop. Like every time I think we've done some, he says, oh, here's another one we need to do now.
So we have about 10 of them going at any given time. And sometimes part of the game is to, what's the polite word? Mess with the other person's mind, or mess with the person's intentions, and push the work around. So you keep it completely unpredictable.
I was just realizing that I, in wanting to do a circle, was trying to replicate this Renga exercise we did once at an outdoor writing workshop, where it was supposedly imitating some of the original Renga, which were supposed to sort of, each person operated at a different degree of the circle, and so the 360 was each person was looking up at the sky or looking into nature from their perspective. And this part of the subversion was that nature introduced a subversion, and their different perspective on the landscape was inherently different. It wasn't introduced necessarily by them, but by time and weather and the world.
Right, and serendipity, just where they were seated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Radcliffe didn't avail us of that.
It got dark.
It's cold.
Every night, the same old thing. Did any of you participate in any Occupy things? Do any of you want to say what the role of poetry was in any of your Occupy installations, installments, encampments? The Oakland Occupy, they had a big poetry component to it. And I just wondered if it was similar.
I mean, it was definitely this really sort of emphasis on communication and language, but I didn't feel I didn't feel necessarily that the sort of creative gesture was kind of took the form of poetry so much. But I don't know, maybe that was, if anyone else had, I don't know if anyone else had experience there. There was...
so there weren't poetry readings?
There was no, there was an Occupy. There were? Okay.
There were.
Yeah, at Oakland it really was integral that there were poetry readings, and yeah. It seemed to be one of the, it interests me because whatever people think, like back to my author function, I went to a meeting, a kind of panel discussion by 4 people from 4 different Occupy encampments: Toronto, Vancouver, Kansas City, and I guess Oakland was the 4th. And one of the topics that came up was arts and Occupy. So it was talking about the arts, and they were all poets, so they were talking about poetry. And the conversation was, there was a lot of conversation about like the people coming out that wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as poets, and certainly weren't part of a sort of intellectual poetry community, but would come out because it was a poetry reading and would stand there, like from all different kinds of demographic areas, and participate in this, and everyone would listen, kind of like open mic. In fact, not kind of like, it was an open mic. So they were talking about how this functioned, and then the woman from Kansas City, I think, said that one of the difficulties of presenting oneself as an artist in the Occupy context was that part of what the Occupy people were often suffering from was gentrification. And very often, typically, gentrification begins when artists of one kind or another enter into a neighborhood where rents are cheap or space is available, and gentrification starts happening. And there was the woman from Vancouver who was African American and Native American when she was the last of the 4 speakers, and she just said, I am deeply, all the other 3 were white people, and she said, I am completely shocked at the assumptions you're making about who are the artists in our American cities. She said, in my community, and she was a person who lived in areas before they were gentrified, and working in a soup kitchen scenario, like cultural centers scenario. And she said, the artists have been here all along. Like, we get together and we write poems, we paint paintings, and it was like I could see and I could feel in myself this shock, like, of course. It's not that the artists are from outside and arrive with art, that there's art inside all of these communities already. It's just not getting recognized by the sort of the market communities as art. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting, and I kind of liked that. The only one I was aware of was the Oakland one, and it did seem really grassroots, because it was an open mic thing. But I think that was probably, to some extent, at some fringes of many of the Occupy encampments, it was like that. Anyway, shall we? Oh, yes.
I had a question. I was wondering in your collaborations, if the question of revision or rewriting comes in, and how, what kind of dilemmas does this pose? How does it get resolved? Do you revise your own work, or do you revise the other person's work, and how, where does that take us?
That's a really excellent question, and I've had various experiences with that one, including a collaboration that fell apart when it came for revision time, and hurt feelings and proprietary feelings emerged. And it was a collaboration with a visual artist who felt that visual art was, in the end, much more valuable, and that the visual art was going to be displayed in a gallery or exhibited, and that the poetry should be subsidiary and not actually sold with the art. So that didn't work, really. But I've done it both ways. The revision, whether each person revises their own. I did the book that I guess is for sale back there with Carla Harriman, and we went away for a week and read pages aloud, and then would revise the whole thing, like what's working. And I will admit that there were points where I thought my way of putting it was superior to what she was suggesting, but then later, okay, I'll surrender that, and then later I'd argue for another point, and it was just interesting. It wasn't painful. Yeah.
I was just wondering, sorry. You've referred several times to these various types of collaborations as games, and they have a particularly social meaning. But I'm wondering if this is exclusively your writing practice, and what do you do when the games aren't enough?
As the second part, like not about the games aren't enough, but just before that?
I'm wondering if you have other valencies of your creative process in terms of other types of writings that you do, or how you think about those types of writing in relation to the collaborative games, as well as
I think
the
of them
larger
as
question.
coexisting and influencing each other. I write like all by myself, quite a lot, and have different ways of pushing myself out of the way in order to get the work to be better than I am. And
what is your criteria for recognizing that?
That I don't fall back on motifs that where I'm just repeating myself or echoing what I was raised to think of as like mellifluous sounds. I don't know. It really depends on it's very site specific, so it's hard to make a generalization. But one work that came out that pleases me a lot is a book called A Border Comedy. And my rule was I had, in the end, I won't bore you with the processes of arriving at this, but in the end I had it's a book in 15 books, that is in 15 sections. And I could never add never 4, but preferably never more than 2 lines without moving to another book. And that I couldn't return to a book until I'd gone through all 15, although I didn't have to go through to them in order. So that by the time I returned, I had no idea, or only the vaguest idea, what it was I had in mind. So I was constantly forgetting, and it was supposed to be about being off balance and in territory where you only half know what's going on, as in a border, like where you don't understand the language and the currency is changing. So that was like one rule that kept me like off balance and interested, and yeah, I just finished I think I finished it. I mean, I need to reread it, but a work that's built entirely of non sequiturs, which is the hardest thing I've ever written, because you do want, like even like reading these lines where not everybody, like nobody wrote any 2 lines, but you still, like the way we read it, we begin to put them together. And to write something that has no 2 lines that relate, they end up deeply seeming to relate. But that was another like challenge, I'll say. Does that answer your question at all?
Sort of. I'm still wondering what you do when the games aren't enough.
Enough to keep writing? Enough to be good?
Enough for what you need to convey.
Change the game, declare it over, drink a glass of wine. You know, it's never enough. None of it's ever enough. Otherwise, probably one would stop writing. You keep like trying more. I don't have any real tricks beyond just effort and going back and trying again. Any last equally challenging and excellent questions?
Oh gosh, that was a sign. I thought you meant.
Thank you, Lyn. I wanted to ask about between, as far as the arc, the spectrum of the way that one can set up a structure to work within. And to say it sort of simply, sort of between a chance mechanism I mean, you could set up the spectrum in different ways, but let's say between a chance mechanism and a very long, like you're doing a collaboration by post and you have as long as you want to think about your line to write. And the sort of, so we did this like 30-second-y thing, right? So close to instant, but a little more than instant. But I guess I wonder if you have a sense of those different amounts of time and if certain ones lend more to so-called success is not the right word, but, you know, seem more fertile than others. The sort of, you know, can you spend too much time with your response, or is there, you know, where is the sweet spot, or something like
Yeah, I in my experience, these fast ones are perfect for this kind of situation where you have like limited amount of time, but the felicity of the results are not really the product of art making. They're the product of the wonders of the way people put language together and the amount of intelligence that people, or care and thoughtfulness. Whereas the one where you have really a long time to think about it, and like how are you going to respond, and what are the possibilities, seem to me much more rewarding. And but you know, like some of the collaborations that were done, like that Mia and I were involved in with others, in retrospect they weren't done so fast. Like we had an hour and a half to work on something, but when there's longer lines, it seems like there's just more substance there. That it doesn't, like the risk of this is that they're exemplary in their cleverness, but maybe not worth lingering over for a long time. I mean, and that's the challenge, I think, because the single author mode is a mode in which what you see is the output of a intelligence that's been at work over a prolonged period of time in order to do the best it could to get something right. And the collaborative thing, that's much harder to know that there's real, that the substance that's there is more than the product of serendipity or gratuitousness. But that's a question that comes up in like collage works, montage works. If you've got really great material and you've gone out and you've collected really cool stuff, when you put it together, you're likely to have cool stuff, or a cool stuffed thing, coolly stuffed thing, and which again then just raises the question of like, where is the intelligence here? Is it in a human or in the materials? And I like to think both are possible. But definitely, for me, the one that you work on longer is the one that's more rewarding. Anything else? Well, thank you all for your work, and again, thanks to Christina and Chloe and Mary and Mia for putting all of this together. And enjoy your snowstorm, and I may get stuck and enjoy it with you, or I may fly home tomorrow morning back to Berkeley.
Thank you so much.